Have you ever wondered how a single moment, one split second of discovery, could shatter a perfectly crafted facade? This is the story of Sarah Robertson, a devoted wife who believed in the sanctity of love and marriage, only to find herself caught in a whirlwind of betrayal when she stumbled upon her husband's mistress at his office. As she stood there, pregnant and trembling with rage, little did she know that a DNA test lurked in the shadows, poised to devastate everything she thought she knew. Brace yourself for a relentless ride of lies, secrets, and shocking twists that will leave you speechless. Sarah Robertson was no stranger to life's challenges. At 32, she had faced her fair share of heartbreak and setbacks before meeting Richard Johnson, a charismatic investment banker at Allen & Myers Financial Services. When Richard first walked into her life, he seemed to radiate stability, confidence, and a touch of old-fashioned charm. That was 5 years ago. Today, Sarah was sitting by the large bay window in their suburban home, hands resting gently on her growing belly, reflecting on the blessing she was about to bring into the world. The house itself was a symbol of their mutual hard work, a 2-story brick home with a pristine lawn and carefully chosen decor. Friends would comment on how picture-perfect their life seemed. Neighbors smiled at the sight of Sarah's baby bump waving in approval as they jogged or walked their dogs down the quiet streets. On the surface, everything looked idyllic: a glowing wife preparing a nursery, a busy husband providing for his family, and a child on the way. Yet beneath the veneer of a perfect suburban marriage lurked a subtle disquiet. It had started as the faintest flicker of doubt. Those nights Richard would come home late, without a proper explanation, or the weekends he claimed to be catching up on office work, while Sarah battled morning sickness alone. Sarah tried convincing herself it was all temporary. After all, Richard's job was demanding, and they needed to prepare financially for the baby's arrival. Their relationship had blossomed quickly. After a whirlwind romance of less than a year, they got married in an intimate ceremony on a sunny beach in Hawaii. Family and close friends witnessed their vows, tears of joy shining in their eyes. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, was the best man, a tall, boisterous fellow who loved practical jokes but had a heart of gold. Sarah's longtime confidant, Harriet Edwards, served as her maid of honor and had been the first to encourage Sarah to take a leap of faith with Richard. Shortly after the honeymoon, Sarah and Richard settled into the rhythms of daily life. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, worked from a cozy office upstairs. Her flexible schedule allowed her to build a stable clientele while also keeping the house in order. Richard, on the other hand, thrived in the high-stakes world of finance. He could negotiate million-dollar contracts before breakfast and charm his boss into awarding him the heftiest bonuses by lunchtime. However, once Sarah became pregnant, life started shifting. What had once been a comfortable partnership turned into anxious nights and suspicious glances. Sarah found herself scrolling through Richard's social media, looking for signs of hidden messages or flirty interactions. She had yet to find concrete evidence, just a vague sense that something was off. If only she could put her finger on it, Sarah thought as she sat by the window that day. In her heart, she still hoped everything was fine, that the weight of her suspicions was merely the pressure of impending motherhood. But an unshakable feeling told her a storm was brewing, and no carefully curated suburban dream could shelter her from the downpour that was about to come. The first real hint arrived one Friday evening. Sarah was up late designing a client's logo when she heard Richard's car pull into the driveway. It was nearly midnight. Her heart fluttered with relief, but as he stepped through the front door, Her relief shifted to alarm. He reeked of expensive perfume, not the kind she wore, and not the kind carried by the air of any bar she knew he frequented after work. "Hey, honey," Richard said with an attempt at casualness, removing his tie and avoiding her eyes. A faint flush crept over his cheeks. In the past, she might have blamed the cold, but it was a balmy night with barely a breeze. Sarah forced a smile. "Late night." "Yeah. We had a few urgent client meetings, then some colleagues wanted to grab drinks," he replied. He kept his explanation succinct, offering no more details than necessary. It felt rehearsed. Curiosity flamed within her. She wanted to press for more details, names of colleagues, location of the bar, but she bit her tongue, not wanting to spark an argument. Pregnancy hormones had been causing tension lately, but deep down she suspected this apprehension was something else entirely. Sarah had enough experience with heartbreak to recognize the signs of evasion. Instead, she reached for a different approach. "You hungry? I kept dinner warm." Richard shook his head. "I'm beat. I'll just shower and head to bed." As he trudged upstairs, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, trying to steady her breath. The faint floral scent of someone else's perfume lingered like a ghost in the foyer. Suspicion took root, its tendrils wrapping around her heart. That night, she lay awake, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The next morning, Sarah decided to confide in Harriet. Over a cup of herbal tea at the local cafe, Harriet listened intently, her brow furrowed. They sat tucked in a corner away from the chatter of other patrons. Harriet was the kind of friend who would never sugarcoat the truth. She had been Sarah's companion through heartbreaks past, including Sarah's broken engagement nearly a decade ago. "Sarah, you have to trust your gut," Harriet said, her voice low yet firm. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. But I don't want to accuse him of anything without proof." Sarah replied anxiously, twisting her wedding ring. "He's under a lot of stress at work, and I know the baby is adding to his worries." Harriet sighed. "I get it. You don't want to start a fight or push him away. But you can't ignore the signs. Keep your eyes open." Over the following days, Sarah did just that. She paid attention to Richard's mood swings, the times he spent on his phone, the frequency of his late meetings. She noticed how he sometimes disappeared into the garage for phone calls. She began to wonder if he was truly just talking to clients. Each suspicious moment piled onto the next, forming a mountain of doubt. Yet Sarah struggled to confront him directly. Part of her was afraid of what she might discover. Another part of her worried about the baby needing Richard's support and their finances in order. But little did she know that her suspicions were about to be validated in a far more dramatic way than she could have ever anticipated. It was a bleak Wednesday afternoon when everything came crashing down. Sarah had spent the morning at her obstetrician's office for a routine checkup. The doctor, Dr. Amelia Green, had assured her the pregnancy was progressing normally, and Sarah felt a wave of relief. She thought about surprising Richard at his office with lunch and news of the baby's healthy progress. After all, maybe Harriet was right. Maybe they just needed a little reconnection, something spontaneous to remind them of the love that existed before suspicion took hold. Clutching a paper bag with Richard's favorite tuna salad sandwich, Sarah drove into the city and arrived at Allen & Myers. She walked through the gleaming lobby, giving the receptionist a polite smile. The smell of polished floors and expensive cologne filled the air. Sarah made her way to Richard's floor, a sense of anticipation coursing through her. She pictured the delight on his face when she handed him the lunch, imagining he'd embrace her, declare how thoughtful she was, and maybe they'd talk about baby names. But as the elevator doors opened, Sarah's heart plunged into her stomach. Standing by Richard's office door was a stunning brunette in a tight pencil skirt and a silky blouse, giggling as Richard gently brushed a strand of her hair off her face. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't immediately notice Sarah's arrival. Sarah froze the blood draining from her face, her fingers gripping the paper bag like a lifeline. When Richard finally spotted her, he stiffened. The brunette's face twitched with surprise, and a subtle panic flickered in her eyes. "Sarah." Richard stammered, taking a step back as if the floor had turned to lava. "What are you doing here?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was paralyzed by the sight, by the unspoken truth hovering in the room. At last she found her voice. "I wanted to surprise you with lunch, but I see you're already occupied." The woman's nameplate on her desk read, Christine Monroe, and Sarah recalled Harriet mentioning a new hire in Richard's department. Suddenly the perfume Sarah smelled on him made sense. Her cheeks burned at the realization that it was this woman's perfume she'd detected on Richard's suit. Christine offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. "I'm sorry. We were just discussing a client pitch." Richard nodded vigorously, attempting to play along. "Yes, just work stuff." Sarah's eyes flicked between the two. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "Right," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. Her gaze dropped to the lunch bag in her hand, which now felt like the cruelest joke. She turned on her heel and left, ignoring Richard's calls for her to wait. In that single moment, all the illusions, excuses, and rationalizations she had clung to were obliterated. The floor around her felt as if it might collapse at any second. She hurried back to the elevator, tears blurring her vision. The ride down to the lobby felt agonizingly slow, her mind reeling with questions. Was this a one-time flirtation or a full-blown affair? How long had it been going on? And most crucially, how was she supposed to protect her unborn child from the fallout of this betrayal? Sarah managed to make it home before the tears truly took over. She shut the front door behind her, slid to the floor, and sobbed as muffled screams of anguish escaped her lips. The baby in her womb stirred as if sensing her heart break, prompting her to cradle her belly gently. She realized that no matter how betrayed she felt, her first priority was to remain calm for her unborn child. Still trembling with fury and sorrow, Sarah forced herself into her office, turning on the computer to distract her mind. Within minutes, she found herself searching Christine Monroe's name on social media. There she was. Glamorous photos, multiple posts about late nights at the office, each one racking up likes and flirtatious comments. Sarah's stomach churned at the pictures Christine posing in chic outfits, always sporting that same indulgent smile. Nothing explicit pointed to Richard, but a few cryptic captions about office romance made Sarah's blood boil. That evening around 7:00 p.m., Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Sarah listened to his footsteps as he approached the front door. He entered the house, slowly setting his briefcase down, with a cautious thud, as though he expected to find the place torn apart. Gathering her courage, Sarah stepped into the hallway. The tension between them was palpable. "Sarah," he began, voice tinged with worry. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms protectively over her chest. "Yes, we do." They moved into the living room. Richard tried to take her hand, but she pulled away, refusing to let his touch dilute her anger. He sighed heavily. "Nothing's going on with Christine," he insisted. "She's a junior associate on my team. I've been showing her the ropes." That's it. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Really? Then explain the perfume. On your clothes the late nights, the looks you two shared in your office. Does that all mean nothing? He opened his mouth to retort but fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. That hesitation spoke louder than any confession. Sarah swallowed hard, tears threatening to surface again. "Look," Richard muttered finally. "I admit things got complicated. We spent a lot of time together on projects, had some drinks, maybe it crossed a line. But I swear it isn't serious." Sarah shook her head, the anger boiling. "It isn't serious to you because you have a wife and a child on the way. You can pick up and drop these little flings whenever it suits you. But do you have any idea what this does to me? To our family?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I love you, Sarah. I'm trying to handle a lot of pressure at work, and I messed up. But you have to believe me, Christine and I. It's not love. It just happened." Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. It just happened, as if betrayal was an accidental slip. Her tears returned in full force, but she refused to crumble in front of him. She took a shaky breath, determined to keep control. "I'm pregnant with our baby," she said, voice quivering. "I have no choice but to fight for us but you. You chose to destroy my trust. If we're going to get through this, you need to end it. Immediately." Richard nodded, though he looked more defeated than sorry. Sarah wanted to scream, to throw something, but she needed to remain as composed as possible. Her voice trembled with resolve. "You'll have to prove to me that this is over, Richard. Otherwise, I'm gone." In the wake of the explosive confrontation, Sarah found herself seeking solace in the company of loved ones. She confided in her older sister, Diana Robertson, a pragmatic attorney who lived only a few miles away. Diana wasted no time inviting Sarah over for a Sunday brunch, hoping to offer both emotional support and legal advice, if it came to that. Seated at Diana's dining table, Sarah took measured sips of orange juice while recounting the events leading up to her discovery in Richard's office. She spoke of perfume, late nights, and the image of Christine Monroe's flirtatious gaze. Diana listened carefully, her expression grim. "It sounds like you have enough to believe he's been unfaithful," Diana said at last, placing a comforting hand over Sarah's. "But the question is, do you still want to fight for this marriage?" Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't know. I keep thinking about the baby. Growing up with divorced parents isn't easy. But I also can't keep living with this weight on my heart." Diana nodded. "If you decide to separate, you should be prepared financially and emotionally. But if you choose to stay, he has to work for it. He must cut ties with that woman immediately." Later that same day, Harriet dropped by Sarah's house, bearing homemade lasagna and unwavering moral support. Harriet was incensed by Richard's behavior. "How dare he put you through this, especially when you're pregnant?" she fumed. Sarah shook her head, tears threatening once again. "I feel so torn, Harriet. One moment I want to pack my bags and leave the next. I remember that I still love him. And then there's this baby." With a determined look, Harriet squeezed her friend's hand. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Meanwhile, Richard faced his own reckoning. His parents, Walter and Margaret Johnson, were old-fashioned in their views on marriage and family. They had always adored Sarah for her kindness and believed that once a man pledged his vows, he was to honor them. When Margaret learned of the situation through Diana's concerned phone call, she immediately summoned Richard to their cozy lakeside bungalow. Sitting in the living room, Richard tried to defend himself, but his mother's reproachful stare cut him short. Margaret spoke quietly. "Richard, how could you do this to Sarah? She's pregnant with your child. Have you forgotten your responsibilities?" Walter, a retired school principal, removed his glasses and fixed his son with a stern gaze. "We thought we raised you better. Marriage isn't just about the good times. It's about commitment, especially during hardships." Richard sighed. "I know. I messed up and I regret it. But Sarah and I haven't been close for months. She's so consumed with the pregnancy and I felt alone." Margaret bristled. "That's no excuse. You have to fix this. If Christine's truly out of your life, you must prove it. Otherwise, you'll lose Sarah and our grandchild before they even have a chance to know you." His parents' disapproval hit Richard hard. That night, as he drove back to the house he shared with Sarah, he felt the full weight of the mess he had created. Regret gnawed at him, but so did a lingering question. Was his connection to Christine really something he could just bury? Behind the polished facade of Christine Monroe's ambition lay a tangled mix of emotions. Although she'd carefully curated her online persona, her personal life was far from picture perfect. She had grown up in a small town in Wisconsin, watching her father abandon her mother when she was only 10. Christine vowed to build a life of independence and success so she would never have to rely on anyone who might walk away. When she moved to the city to work at Allen & Myers, she was determined to climb the corporate ladder. She networked relentlessly, volunteered for demanding projects, and never hesitated to do whatever it took to stand out. In Richard Johnson, she found a mentor who recognized her potential. Their professional rapport initially flourished late-night brainstorming sessions, conference calls with high-profile clients, celebratory drinks after sealing a deal. Over time, the line between mentorship and personal involvement blurred. Christine was drawn to Richard's confidence, his laughter, the way he could make her feel seen in a sea of colleagues. She knew he was married, but at first she told herself it was harmless, just a little flirtation. Gradually she sought him out more frequently, confiding in him about her dreams and insecurities. Richard, feeling the pressures at home and work, lapped up the attention. Soon, stolen glances became lingering touches, and the occasional after-work drink turned into an intimate rendezvous. Yet Christine was no wide-eyed innocent. She understood she was meddling in another woman's marriage, but rationalized it with her own heartbreak. "I'm not the reason their relationship is failing. It must have already been broken." Deep down, she realized she was repeating the cycle she'd witnessed as a child, someone bridging the gap left by a troubled marriage. But she believed she deserved a chance at happiness, even if it meant stepping over invisible lines. That Wednesday afternoon, when Sarah showed up unannounced at the office, Christine felt her world tilt dangerously. Richard's wife was younger and prettier than she'd expected, her eyes filled not just with anger, but also with raw pain. Christine had stood there, her heart pounding as Richard raced after his wife. She knew the fantasy bubble had burst. In the days that followed, Christine waited for Richard to reach out to offer comfort or reassurance. But he distanced himself, returning her calls, only to discuss urgent office matters. His manner was cold, efficient, and painfully detached. A part of Christine raged at the injustice. How dare he cut me off when he was an equal participant in this affair? Another part of her felt the sharp pangs of guilt. She imagined Sarah's tear-streaked face and the child growing inside her. One evening, Christine found herself alone in her upscale apartment, a glass of wine in hand. She scrolled through countless photos, rereading messages that once felt exciting. Now they stung with regret. She contemplated resigning from Allen and Myers, but her pride and ambition loomed. Why should she sacrifice her hard-earned position? Thus a storm brewed within Christine Monroe, a conflict between her desire for professional success, her lingering feelings for Richard, and her conscience nagging her about the pregnant woman she had wronged. Little did she know the next developments would force her to confront the consequences of her actions in ways she never anticipated. Richard Johnson found himself in a whirlpool of emotions. Each morning, he woke up beside Sarah, feeling the tension coil around them like an invisible rope tightening with every passing day. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and devotion, now bore a guarded gaze that reminded him of his betrayal. He tried to be attentive, waking early to brew her decaffeinated tea offering to drive her to doctor's appointments. But the unspoken accusation hung in the air. Work offered little respite. The once invigorating environment of Allen and Myers felt suffocating. Colleagues whispered about trouble in his personal life, and he couldn't escape Christine's presence. She still excelled at her job, commanding attention and respect from clients. When their paths crossed, an awkward silence replaced the friendly banter they once shared. He'd murmur a quick hello, avoid her eyes, and bury himself in spreadsheets or phone calls. Yet he was haunted by memories of her laughter and the closeness they'd shared. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, tried to intervene. James, who had known Richard since college, invited him out for a beer in hopes of getting him to open up. They ended up at O'Malley's pub, a dimly lit bar where the echo of clinking glasses and murmured conversations created a familiar backdrop. After a swig of beer, James leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "Rich, what's going on?" "You're a mess. Talk to me." Richard sighed heavily, rolling the cool bottle between his palms. "I messed up big time, James. Got involved with Christine, and Sarah caught us. She's pregnant, man." "What kind of person does that to his pregnant wife?" James shook his head, empathy and reprimand mingling in his expression. "I'm not here to judge you, but you gotta fix this. Sarah's a good woman, and you're about to be a father." Richard nodded, a wave of guilt washing over him. "I know. I love her. I felt like we weren't connecting and Christine was there offering some excitement. I never meant for it to go this far." "That's the problem," James replied softly. "You might not have meant it, but it happened. Now you have to choose which path you're going to take, and be ready to deal with the consequences." Consequences. The word settled heavily in Richard's chest. He thought about the baby, a tiny heartbeat that he had once eagerly anticipated hearing at every ultrasound. The idea of not being part of that child's everyday life terrified him. He imagined empty cribs and lonely nights in a half-furnished apartment if Sarah kicked him out. The vision stabbed at his heart. On the drive home, Richard pondered his options. On one side there was Sarah and their unborn child, a family that once represented hope and stability. On the other side there was Christine, dangerously appealing, yet complicated the living embodiment of a mistake he could not take back. Perhaps if he truly ended it with Christine, he could salvage his marriage. But a sneaking question remained. Would Sarah ever truly forgive him? Richard gripped the steering wheel, his mind whirling with regret and longing. He knew time was running out. Every day he delayed taking decisive action, he risked losing the life he once cherished. A month passed, steeped in tension and guarded conversations. Sarah's suspicions simmered, despite Richard's half-hearted attempts to show he was done with Christine. The situation came to a head when Harriet introduced a startling question. "Are you absolutely sure the baby is Richard's?" At first, Sarah was offended by the suggestion, but Harriet raised an uncomfortable point. Richard's unwavering suspicion that the baby's due date seemed off. Indeed, Richard had once casually mentioned that he couldn't recall Sarah's exact last menstrual period date. As if the stress of the affair wasn't enough, the spectre of doubt about paternity cast a new cloud over their already shaky relationship. Sarah felt both insulted and fearful. She'd never been unfaithful, but the seeds of uncertainty had been planted. Caught in a storm of worry, Sarah decided to take control of the narrative. She approached Richard with a proposition, a prenatal DNA test. "Let's settle this once and for all." She said, arms crossed, defensively. "I have nothing to hide, and if it'll give you peace of mind, then so be it." Richard hesitated. On the one hand, if he learned the baby was indeed his, it might force him to face his guilt with no room for denial. On the other hand, a tiny part of him fed by his own insecurities wondered if Sarah had grown closer to someone else during their marital distance. The tension between them and the consistent presence of Harriet or Diana in Sarah's life gave him irrational twinges of jealousy. Eventually, he agreed. They went together to a specialized prenatal clinic recommended by Diana. The process was straightforward, a simple blood draw from Sarah and a cheek swab from Richard. The results would take a week, and those 7 days felt like an eternity, suspended in doubt. During that week, Sarah struggled with waves of anxiety. She knew she had been faithful, yet the test symbolized more than just paternity. It represented their crumbling trust. Every time Richard left the house, she braced herself for another betrayal. Every time her phone buzzed, she half expected a message from Christine, flaunting her hold on Richard. On day 6, Sarah and Richard sat in tense silence in the living room, replaying the last few months in their minds. She was picking at the hem of her maternity blouse, while he stared blankly at the muted television. Suddenly, Richard's phone lit up a message from the clinic, stating their results were ready. Heart pounding, they agreed to go in person the next morning. Walking into the clinic, they were greeted by a nurse with a sympathetic smile, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. They were ushered into a small consultation room. A doctor wearing a crisp white coat entered with a folder. She cleared her throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the prenatal paternity test results are conclusive." She handed them a piece of paper. Richard scanned the words quickly, his eyes widening. He handed the paper to Sarah, who read it in equal shock. The test declared Richard was not the biological father. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah gaped at the words, rereading them, the breath knocked out of her. She felt as if the floor gave way beneath her feet. Richard stared, disbelieving. Every ounce of suspicion he'd harbored suddenly flared while Sarah felt a surge of protest in her heart. "This can't be right. This is impossible." Sarah left the clinic in a daze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Richard marched beside her, his face a mixture of triumph and pain, as though he'd been both vindicated and mortally wounded. The drive home was excruciating. Neither spoke the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. As soon as they stepped into the house, the accusations flew. "What the hell, Sarah?" Richard roared, slamming the front door shut. "You said you had nothing to hide." Sarah, reeling, fought to steady her voice. "I don't know how this happened. I swear I wasn't with anyone else." "Don't lie," he snapped, tears brimming in his own eyes. "The test is conclusive." "Sarah, conclusive." She gasped, feeling the walls of her world crumble. Was the test faulty? Could there have been a mix-up at the lab? She struggled to articulate her confusion, but Richard's rage was relentless. "I stood by you," he snarled. "I tried to fix this marriage, even after my mistake. And now I find out you betrayed me." Sarah trembled, pressing her hands over her ears as if to block the harrowing words. "Richard, please. I didn't cheat on you. I can't explain the result, but I'm innocent." Richard gave a hollow laugh. "Innocent? You're telling me the lab made a mistake?" "That's far-fetched, Sarah." Overwhelmed and desperate, Sarah grabbed her phone and called Diana. Barely able to articulate the horror of the situation, within minutes Diana arrived and tried to mediate. Richard showed her the test results, his hands shaking. "It's legally binding, Diana. The doctor said it's as accurate as it gets. So either my sister is lying or there was a lab error." Diana studied the document, her eyes narrow. "We need a second opinion. This result is too bizarre. Sarah swears she's been faithful." Richard snorted, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. "Sure, get another test," he said. "But I'm not sticking around to see how this soap opera ends." Sarah's heart shattered as she watched him pack. She wanted to beg him to stay, to trust her. But what words could she possibly offer now? She was as perplexed as he was. As Richard walked out the door, an icy realization settled over Sarah. Not only had her husband possibly ended their marriage, but her child's paternity was in question, and she had no logical explanation. She sank to the floor, Diana rushing to her side. Diana held her, stroking her hair. "We'll sort this out. We'll get an independent lab to verify. But for now you need to rest." That night, Sarah cried herself to sleep, unable to shake the sense of betrayal from both sides, her husband's affair with Christine and his refusal to believe in her fidelity. Meanwhile, Richard took refuge at James Peterson's place, wrestling with questions he never thought he'd face. Who was the father of Sarah's child, if not him? And could there be any truth to her pleas of innocence? A week later, Sarah arranged for a second DNA test through a reputable lab recommended by Harriet's cousin, a nurse practitioner. The results wouldn't be back for another 10 days, leaving her in agonizing suspense. Her emotions swung between despair and determination. Each kick from the baby felt like a reminder of the child she loved unconditionally, even if the entire world doubted her story. Richard, still living at James Peterson's apartment, found himself torn. He tried to immerse himself in work, but the tension with Christine in the office escalated. She cornered him in the break room one afternoon, eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "I heard rumors about a paternity test," she said, setting down her coffee mug, "and that you moved out." Richard exhaled heavily. "It's complicated, Christine." Christine studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Look, I'm not here to guilt you, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm willing." He gave her a tired look, recalling how her presence had once offered an escape. Now it just reminded him of everything unraveling in his life. "Thanks, but I'm fine," he said, turning to leave. During his solitude, Richard spent a lot of time reflecting on his marriage. Memories of Sarah's radiant smile at their wedding, the first time they heard the baby's heartbeat, and the countless moments of shared happiness haunted him. He'd betrayed her first, yet now he felt equally betrayed, his trust shattered by a lab result. Still, a small voice whispered, "What if she's telling the truth?" Unsure of what he wanted, Richard called Sarah one evening. She answered, her voice subdued but laced with longing. There was a moment of silence before he spoke. "How are you holding up?" She inhaled shakily. "It's hard. The house feels empty without you." His chest tightened. "Look, I'm still angry and confused, but I'm open to talking. Maybe we can meet for coffee." Sarah agreed, her heart cautiously hopeful. They decided on a small cafe, Le Petite Rose, the place where they'd had their first date. The next day they sat across from each other, the gentle hum of other patrons providing a comforting background. Sarah broke the ice. "I appreciate you meeting me. I know things look bad, but I promise I've been faithful. I'm just as baffled by the test result." Richard stared into his coffee. "I don't understand, Sarah. If the test says I'm not the father, how can it be wrong? But a part of me wants to believe you." She reached out and placed a trembling hand over his. "I'll do as many tests as it takes to prove it. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even after everything." His eyes glistened with emotion. "I'm sorry for what I did with Christine. But this baby, if it's not mine, how do we move forward?" Sarah's voice quavered with desperation. "I don't have the answers yet. But can we at least try to keep communication open until the second results come in?" With a heavy sigh, Richard nodded. "Yes. But let's be honest, if the second test confirms the same thing, I don't know if I can stay." Their attempts at reconciliation were fragile, built on the faint hope that science had made a mistake. Yet lurking behind their forced smiles was the ominous question: what if it wasn't a mistake at all? The day the second DNA test results were scheduled to arrive, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. She barely slept the night before, pacing her bedroom, replaying every intimate moment with Richard in her head. There was no one else, she was certain of it. But how to prove what seemed scientifically impossible? Diana accompanied her to the lab, the same official building with sterile white walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. A technician handed Sarah an envelope. She trembled as she opened it. Diana's grip on her shoulder tightened in solidarity. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The second test yielded the same verdict: Richard was not the father. The paper shook in her hands as she mutely handed it to Diana. The disbelief on Diana's face mirrored Sarah's own. "This doesn't make sense," Diana mumbled. "You've never been with anyone else, right?" "No, never." Sarah whispered, tears welling up. She felt trapped in a nightmare that defied reason. They returned to the car where Sarah broke down in sobs. Diana tried to console her. "We need to get a lawyer involved. Maybe they made a mistake, or the lab is confusing the samples." Sarah's tear-stained face contorted with anguish. "2 labs, 2 identical results. How is that even possible? Unless—" Her voice trailed off. "Unless what?" Diana pressed. Sarah's mind raced. Could she have had a rare medical phenomenon like chimerism, where her own DNA conflicted with the baby's? She'd once read an article about it. But that was exceedingly rare, almost unheard of. Still, she clung to that faint possibility like a lifeline. Diana, ever the pragmatic attorney, insisted on a meeting with a genetic counselor to explore any medical explanations. In the meantime, Sarah had to break the news to Richard. She dreaded the conversation, fearing it might be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. That evening, Sarah found Richard waiting for her on the front porch when she got home, having sensed the results would arrive. One glance at her tear-streaked face, and he knew. She handed him the envelope, and a fresh wave of anger mixed with heartbreak contorted his features. "I can't believe this," he muttered, scanning the paper. 2 tests, the same result. You lied to me, Sarah. All this time playing the victim when you're the one. He stopped himself, as though speaking further might break him completely. She grabbed his arm, her own tears flowing. Richard, I swear I didn't cheat on you. I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to find out. Please just give me time. He jerked away, eyes blazing. Time for what? To concoct another story I tried to reconcile. I tried to believe you. But facts are facts. She sank to her knees, sobbing in the twilight glow that bathed the porch. I'm telling the truth, she whispered desperately. For a moment Richard hesitated, torn between compassion and betrayal. Finally he let out a strangled sigh. I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't do this anymore. He walked away, leaving Sarah crouched on the wooden boards, her heart cracking open. The only consolation, the faint flutter of the baby in her womb. Little did either of them know the biggest twist was yet to come. The rain had started just before dawn. Light at first, then heavier, soaking the city in grey melancholy. Sarah sat by the window, cradling her swollen belly, staring out at the wet streets that reflected a world just as muddled as her thoughts. A week had passed since the second paternity test had crushed her, with the same unbearable result. Richard is not the father. But how could that be? She hadn't been with anyone else. Not emotionally, not physically. The accusation alone had been an earthquake. The confirmation a landslide. Each day she had carried the weight of disbelief like a second pregnancy inside her. Her appetite had all but vanished. Her smiles were hollow, offered only to reassure Harriet and Diana that she was okay. But she wasn't. She was barely holding herself together. It was Harriet who pushed her to keep asking questions. If you're certain, then the science is wrong. And science doesn't like to be wrong. Find the flaw. That simple statement lit something inside Sarah. A flicker of stubborn fire. She wasn't ready to give up on her truth. So on a foggy Wednesday morning, she booked an appointment with Dr. Patricia Langley, a respected genetic counselor with decades of experience. Harriet insisted on going with her. You're not walking into that room alone. Not after everything you've survived. At the medical complex, Sarah clutched her file of lab reports, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sterile hum of the clinic. The waiting room was unremarkable, beige chairs, motivational posters about family health, a faint scent of antiseptic. But to Sarah, it felt like a courtroom, a place where maybe the truth would finally be heard. When they were called in, Dr. Langley greeted them with calm eyes and a firm handshake. She was in her early 50s, with graying curls tucked into a bun and a demeanor that inspired both authority and compassion. Sarah launched into her story 2 paternity tests, both negative. A marriage on the brink. A man who had cheated, but who also believed she had too. And a child growing inside her, now clouded by a question mark that no mother should have to endure. Dr. Langley listened without interrupting. Then she leaned back, fingers steepled thoughtfully. And you're certain there's no possibility of another biological father? Sarah met her eyes. Absolutely. I swear on my life. Dr. Langley nodded slowly. Then we explore other explanations. Rare ones, but not impossible. She began explaining something Sarah had only seen in a scattered few medical articles: confined placental mosaicism. In rare cases, Dr. Langley said, turning a notepad toward them, the placenta, the tissue we use for many prenatal tests, contains a different set of DNA than the actual fetus. So a test done on maternal blood or placental DNA can misidentify paternity. It's not the norm, but it's been documented. Sarah's breath caught. You're saying the test could be wrong? Not because the lab made a mistake, but because my body gave them the wrong sample. Precisely, Dr. Langley replied. The test may have measured genetic material from the placenta instead of the baby. Harriet leaned forward. Can this be proven? With further testing, yes. But the most definitive answer would come after birth from a postnatal paternity test directly on the baby's blood. Sarah felt a jolt of hope so strong it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Finally, something that made sense. Something she could fight with. She clutched her belly, her baby kicking softly against her hand, as if he too understood that a truth long buried was beginning to surface. The rest of the appointment blurred into instructions: what labs to visit, what tests to order, which specialists to loop in. But the final words from Dr. Langley echoed loudest. You are not crazy, and you are not alone in this. The next morning, with medical documents in hand and her heart pounding harder than ever, Sarah drafted a long message to Richard. She attached Dr. Langley's explanation, the case studies, and even a voice note where she tried through a cracked voice to explain the scientific possibilities. Then she waited. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. No reply. By the third morning, Sarah's phone buzzed. A new message not from Richard but from James Peterson. I gave him everything you sent. He's reading it now. He wants to meet the doctor. Sarah could hardly breathe. Was this the beginning of a shift? 2 days later, Dr. Langley called her, her voice calm as ever. Sarah, Richard came in today. I explained everything again in person. He listened. Sarah's hands trembled. And what did he say? There was a long pause. He didn't say much, but he cried. That evening, Richard knocked on Sarah's door. She opened it with cautious restraint, wearing an oversized sweater and the same exhaustion she'd been carrying for weeks. He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure he deserved to. I'm sorry, he said. That was all. But the way his voice cracked, the way his shoulders sagged under guilt and regret, told her it wasn't just a formality. It was grief. Grief for the way he'd accused her, for not believing in her when she'd most needed it, for choosing doubt over love. I was wrong, he continued. So wrong. I let my own betrayal blind me to your truth. You told me again and again, and I walked away. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't move, didn't speak. I know I hurt you, he said, voice shaking. And I know this explanation doesn't erase that. But if you'll let me, I want to be here when the baby is born. I want to take the postnatal test, and if it confirms I'm the father, I want to earn my place again, as a dad. Maybe someday, as your husband. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to feel something other than sorrow. She didn't smile, but she nodded, slowly. I'll let you be there, she whispered. But Richard, this doesn't mean everything is fixed. We have a long way to go. I know, he said, but I'll walk every step of it. And as the rain continued to fall outside, they stood in the quiet space between the past and the possible future, not healed, not whole, but willing to try. Armed with Dr. Langley's findings, Sarah called Richard, leaving a voicemail and sending him a detailed email outlining the situation. She explained the medical anomaly and pleaded for him to speak to Dr. Langley himself. Days passed with no response. Undeterred, Sarah forwarded the information to James Peterson, hoping he could persuade Richard to at least consider the possibility. Finally, 2 weeks later, Richard showed up at Dr. Langley's office unannounced. His hair was disheveled dark circles under his eyes, betraying his own sleepless nights. The genetic counselor greeted him calmly, reiterating what she had explained to Sarah, that the paternity tests could have been compromised by rare placental genetic differences. She assured him that once the baby was born, a postnatal test would almost certainly confirm he was the biological father. Richard's world spun. Guilt washed over him like a cold tide. He thought of how he had humiliated Sarah, refused to believe her, and pushed her away at her most vulnerable. He realized the terrible irony he had betrayed Sarah. Yet he'd accused her of the ultimate betrayal, compounding her pain. That evening, Richard drove to the house they once shared. Sarah stood by the living room window, arms wrapped protectively around her baby bump. As he entered, she stared at him, uncertain whether to brace herself for more heartbreak or cling to hope. "I spoke to Dr. Langley," he said quietly. She explained everything. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "So you believe me now?" He nodded, anguished. "I'm so sorry for everything. The doubts, the accusations. I don't know. Angry. Confused. And all along I was the one who actually wronged you." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You broke my trust, Richard. You and Christine. And then you left when I needed you most." He moved closer, hesitantly, taking her hand. "I know. I don't expect this to be fixed overnight. But if there's any chance of rebuilding, of starting fresh for the sake of our baby, I'm begging for it." Sarah studied the desperation in his eyes. She thought of the endless nights she'd cried alone, the heartbreak she endured while pregnant. Could she forgive him? Could they rebuild their lives on the ashes of betrayal? "I need time," she whispered. "I need you to show me you've really changed." Richard nodded, tears in his own eyes. "I will. Whatever it takes." In the months that followed, Richard underwent individual therapy to confront the root causes of his affair. They also attended couples counseling, facing their problems head-on rather than burying them under resentment. Christine Monroe requested a transfer to another branch of Allen and Myers, seeking a fresh start. Her departure cleared some of the tension at Richard's workplace, though the guilt would linger for both of them. Finally, the baby arrived, a beautiful boy. They named Daniel. The moment Richard held his son for the first time, tears of joy and regret mingled on his face. A postnatal paternity test confirmed beyond any doubt that Daniel was indeed Richard's child. It was a bittersweet vindication for Sarah. They weren't magically healed. Rebuilding trust was a gradual, painstaking process. Late-night arguments still flared old wounds, still ached, but a mutual determination to move forward for the sake of Daniel guided them. Some days they felt the old spark of love that had once brought them together. Other days they wrestled with ghosts of betrayal. Yet in their child's innocent smile, they found a reason to keep trying. And so their life carried on, not as the immaculate suburban fairy tale Sarah once envisioned, but as a more complex tapestry, woven from heartbreak, hard truths, and hope. They learned that marriage is a fragile thing, held together by honesty, compassion, and a willingness to fight for it, even when the world seems set on tearing it apart. Thank you for witnessing this roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and unexpected redemption. Sarah's ordeal reminds us that even the strongest relationships can be tested by deception, doubt, and cruel twists of fate. Richard learned the hard way that straying from trust can unravel everything you hold dear. Meanwhile, Sarah discovered that love, though resilient, requires constant nurturing and unwavering honesty. $1 million mansion, a glittering charity gala, and a rumor that shattered her world. These were the moments that changed Veronica Caldwell's life forever. The night she glimpsed her millionaire husband, Arthur Caldwell, in a corner suite with another woman, her heart stopped and her reality came undone. But Veronica wasn't one to wilt under heartbreak. In a blaze of fury and determination, she demanded answers. Within hours, she'd contacted high-profile attorney Lisa Bloom, filed a lawsuit, and sought to freeze Arthur's assets. Little did she know this was only the beginning. Betrayal, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations lay just beyond the door. Veronica Caldwell had been raised with modest means in a small Midwest town called Havenwood. When she first met Arthur, it was during a charity event at the luxurious Blackwell Hotel in downtown Chicago, where she had been working as an event organizer. He introduced himself with a gentle smile and impeccable charm, claiming to be a philanthropist looking to support children's healthcare initiatives. Veronica was drawn to his warmth and what appeared to be genuine kindness. Arthur was a man with an understated confidence and a magnetic presence that commanded the room. After weeks of casual dates, mostly at public places like art galleries, fancy brunch spots, and one memorable evening at the Chicago Symphony, Veronica found herself swept into Arthur's extravagant world. Diamonds, fine wines, designer gowns. These were all new to her. Yet, despite the sudden wealth and whirlwind romance, Arthur always seemed open and attentive, making her feel truly seen. But those early days were a stark contrast to what Veronica discovered that fateful evening at the Caldwell mansion. The estate, perched on 10 acres just outside the city, boasted a lush garden, a private lake, and a breathtaking view of the skyline. Arthur often hosted lavish fundraisers there, inviting everyone from local politicians to Hollywood celebrities. At one such event, Veronica, now Mrs. Caldwell for nearly 3 years, noticed her husband had slipped away from the main gathering. When he didn't return, she went searching. She passed the rose garden, circled around the pool house, and eventually found herself outside the upstairs study. A strange giggle echoed through the hallway. With her hand trembling on the doorknob, she peeked inside. There, under the glow of a crystal chandelier, Arthur's arms were intimately wrapped around a woman Veronica had never seen before. Her world cracked in an instant. In that moment, Veronica felt her entire body go numb. She wanted to burst through the door, confront them both, and demand answers. But something stopped her. Instead, she crept backward, heart-hammering tears stinging her eyes, until she found her way back downstairs. She needed to breathe. She needed to think. Throughout the rest of the evening, she maintained her composure with an otherworldly grace she never knew she possessed. She greeted guests engaged in polite conversation, forced laughter when required. The man she believed was her loving husband eventually reappeared, guiding that same mystery woman around the party, with a dazzling smile on his face. Veronica watched from a distance. Her mind spiraled, replaying his affectionate gaze, the gentle way he pressed a hand to the woman's back. The reality settled in Arthur Caldwell. Her beloved husband was having an affair right there in their home. The next morning, Veronica woke early, exhausted but resolute. She needed clarity, so she confronted Arthur the moment he walked into the breakfast lounge. He greeted her with a casual kiss on the cheek, as if nothing had happened. But Veronica could see the flicker of panic in his eyes when she slid her phone across the marble table, showing him a candid photo she'd managed to snap of him and his companion the night before. Arthur's expression froze, and for a moment his perpetual calm facade cracked. He tried to stammer out an excuse, something about a harmless flirtation, a misunderstanding, the woman being a potential investor. Veronica felt her stomach churn. She might have believed him once, but the way he'd held that stranger was anything but professional. Before Arthur could collect himself, she walked out. The weight of betrayal settled heavily on her shoulders, fueling her next step. Though Veronica had never considered divorce or anything drastic, she wasn't naive. Growing up with a single mother who struggled to make ends meet taught her one thing: preparation was everything. She had a friend from college, Laura Singletary, who now worked as an associate at a prestigious law firm in Chicago. Veronica left the mansion and sped through winding roads until she reached Laura's office. Tearing up in the reception area, Veronica recounted the entire incident, from the moment she caught Arthur in the act to his feeble denials. Laura, always pragmatic and fiercely loyal, recommended they call in a top-tier attorney specializing in complex divorces and asset management. That was when Lisa Bloom's name came up. Realizing how complicated things might get, especially given Arthur's wealth and political connections, Veronica agreed. She wanted the best, and if it meant going toe-to-toe with her husband's empire, so be it. Within hours, Laura had arranged a meeting in Lisa Bloom's chic downtown office. Veronica sat in a plush leather chair, scanning the glossy photos of high-profile clients on the walls, feeling both intimidated and strangely emboldened. Lisa entered with a focused energy, wearing a smart black suit and practical heels. She listened intently as Veronica poured out her story. When Veronica finished, Lisa's eyes narrowed with professional determination. "We have options," she said firmly, detailing the potential legal strategies. Filing for divorce was straightforward. But if Arthur was indeed funneling money or shifting assets around, Veronica needed to act fast to ensure she got her fair share. You'd be surprised, Lisa warned, how many times wealthy spouses try to hide funds overseas or in obscure trusts once they suspect a breakup. Veronica's head swirled, but she knew one thing: she had to protect herself. With a deep breath, she agreed to proceed. On Lisa's advice, they decided to file a petition for divorce and a motion to freeze Arthur's assets immediately. Veronica wasn't out for revenge. At least that's what she told herself. But she'd poured her heart into the marriage, invested her life in supporting Arthur's philanthropic endeavors. She wasn't about to be left with nothing if he decided to vanish half his fortune before the ink on the divorce papers dried. The legal process began with a flurry of phone calls, paperwork, and discreet investigations into Arthur's financial dealings. Veronica felt both liberated and terrified. Each phone call with Lisa or Laura revealed more complexities: shell companies overseas, accounts, business partners who might not be entirely legitimate. She discovered that Arthur was far wealthier than she'd even realized. The sense of betrayal grew deeper. Not only had he been unfaithful, he'd also kept hidden parts of his life from her. The first real confrontation happened just 3 days after she filed. Veronica was alone in the Caldwell mansion, in the very study where she'd caught Arthur cheating. She was packing up some personal belongings when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Arthur appeared, face taut with anger, a crumpled envelope in his hand. "You served me divorce papers," he said, voice shaking with fury. Veronica tried to stand her ground, but fear twisted in her stomach. Arthur looked like a man pushed beyond his limits. "You cheated on me," she responded, her voice surprisingly steady. "There's no going back." Arthur launched into an elaborate denial, trying every angle, blame, begging threats. He claimed her lawsuit was a blatant money grab, accusing her of only wanting his fortune. Veronica's hands trembled, but her resolve remained firm. She walked out, letting his accusations echo unanswered behind her. News of the divorce filing spread through Chicago's high society in a matter of hours. Rumors swirled at country clubs, upscale boutiques, and charity luncheons. Veronica's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from so-called friends and acquaintances. Some offered fake sympathy fishing for juicy details. Others criticized her, whispering that she was a gold digger, trying to ruin poor Arthur Caldwell. Public opinion seemed divided. Arthur had a long-standing reputation as a philanthropic hero, especially for his donations to children's hospitals. Many found it hard to believe he could have engaged in an affair, let alone hidden a labyrinth of assets. Veronica's quiet heartbreak was overshadowed by the scandal of the lawsuit as tabloids and gossip columns exploded with sensational headlines. Millionaire mogul's marriage meltdown, Arthur Caldwell's dirty secrets. Veronica felt exposed, betrayed not just by Arthur, but by the so-called friends who relished in her downfall. In the midst of this media storm, Veronica found unexpected allies. One evening, she received a call from Deborah Knight, a long-time patron of the arts. Deborah and her husband had been close to Arthur and Veronica, but Deborah confessed that she had witnessed odd financial dealings over the years. She'd never said anything before, not wanting to stir the waters. Deborah offered to share what she knew about Arthur's suspicious transactions. Things like off-the-record property deals and shell corporations set up in the Caymans. "I'm not proud of staying silent," Deborah said, "but I'm willing to help if it means stopping him from hurting more people." Veronica felt a surge of gratitude, relieved that she wasn't alone. Perhaps she realized some in their circle were more than superficial partygoers. They were individuals of conscience, willing to support her in this legal and emotional minefield. Meanwhile, Arthur's legal team swung into action. They filed a countersuit, claiming Veronica had violated prenuptial agreements Veronica never even remembered signing. Supposedly, these documents limited her claim on his estate and required her to keep certain marital disputes private. Arthur's lawyers accused Veronica of defamation, insisting she had tarnished his public image by speaking to the press. The pressure was immense. Paparazzi camped outside Veronica's new apartment, in a modest downtown building, snapping photos whenever she left to meet Lisa Bloom. Journalists hounded her mother for interviews, digging into every aspect of her past. And swirling amid it all were questions about the mystery woman. Who was she, and what role did she play in Arthur's business? Empire Lisa advised Veronica to keep a low profile. But Veronica realized that the more she tried to hide, the more the tabloids conjured false narratives about her. As depositions and court hearings loomed, Veronica discovered a new layer of deceit. A friend with contacts in city government hinted that Arthur was planning to transfer significant capital to a secret bank account in Switzerland. Furious and frightened, Veronica relayed this information to Lisa. If that transfer happened before the asset freeze took effect, Veronica might lose the financial security she sought, making it nearly impossible to claim what was legally hers. Lisa moved swiftly, filing motions and lobbying the judge for an emergency hearing to freeze Arthur's assets immediately, citing the risk of asset dissipation. It was a bold move and an unprecedented one. In that jurisdiction, usually these matters took months to settle, and judges were reluctant to freeze someone's finances without irrefutable evidence. But the potential for fraud was too great to ignore. The showdown in court was set, and tensions soared to new heights. Standing outside the courthouse with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, Veronica felt her heart pounding like a bass drum. She spotted Arthur exiting his black luxury sedan across the street, flanked by his high-powered legal team. He offered the crowd a tight-lipped smile. The hearing room was surprisingly small, adorned with old wood paneling and a single American flag by the judge's bench. Veronica sat beside Lisa Bloom and Laura, her hands trembling beneath the table. Arthur's attorney, a seasoned litigator named Bradley Fisher, exuded confidence as he argued that there was no credible evidence Arthur was hiding assets. But Lisa had prepared meticulously. She presented emails from Deborah Knight, referencing suspicious accounts, photographs of Arthur's confidential files, and even a recorded phone conversation provided anonymously that hinted at Arthur's intention to offload millions in real estate. The judge listened intently, scowling as he leafed through the documents. After 2 hours of tense testimony and fervent arguments, the judge leaned forward. He reprimanded Arthur's team for lack of transparency and expressed concern about the possibility of undisclosed financial maneuvers. Mr. Caldwell, the judge, intoned voice, echoing in the silent chamber. The evidence is concerning. Therefore, pending further investigation, I'm granting the motion to temporarily freeze your primary liquid assets. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Veronica couldn't breathe. She glanced at Arthur, whose face blanched, eyes flashing with outrage. He whispered something to his attorney before storming out. In the hallway, reporters bombarded Veronica with questions. Though her heart hammered, she kept her statement brief. I have confidence in our judicial system and believe the truth will come out. The cameras captured her every word, broadcasting the image of a determined woman refusing to back down against a powerful millionaire. That night, Veronica returned to her apartment and found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter from an anonymous source typed in neat block letters. It warned her of imminent threats, suggesting that Arthur might retaliate in ways beyond legal maneuvers. She felt her blood turn cold, recalling stories of wealthy tycoons who went to extreme lengths to preserve their fortunes. Terrified, she showed the letter to Lisa Bloom the next morning. Lisa looked alarmed. I'll hire a private security consultant, she said. This might just be a scare tactic, but we can't take any chances. Veronica reluctantly agreed. A small team of security professionals began monitoring her building's entrance, and she was advised to vary her driving routes. She felt like she was living in a crime thriller rather than a divorce dispute. But if Arthur was truly desperate, who knew what he might do next? In an effort to regain some normalcy, Veronica decided to pay a visit to her mother, Marianne Parker, back in Havenwood. She arrived in the sleepy town at dusk, seeking solace in the familiar. The small house with peeling white paint stood as a warm reminder of simpler days. Marianne opened the door with teary eyes and enveloped her daughter in a hug. Inside over cups of mint tea, Veronica confided everything about Arthur's affair, the lawsuit and the mounting threats. Marianne listened quietly. Sadness etched across her face. I always felt there was something too perfect about Arthur, she admitted. You deserved someone honest, someone who didn't hide behind a $1 million smile. Despite the comfort of her mother's presence, Veronica's mind couldn't rest. She knew she couldn't stay in Havenwood for long. Court dates and 1,000 unanswered questions awaited her back in the city. Returning to Chicago, Veronica discovered Arthur had unleashed a new wave of attacks. Publicly, he insisted Veronica was psychologically unstable, citing episodes from her past, a flat-out lie he'd likely fabricated. A swarm of reporters camped outside her apartment, speculating about her mental health. Friends called in confusion. Some even scolded her for dragging Arthur's name through the mud. Lisa Bloom arranged a press conference at her firm's office to set the record straight. Veronica, nerves on edge, stood before a sea of microphones and delivered a measured statement. These allegations are false. I have never been diagnosed with any mental health condition, nor have I experienced episodes. I am simply standing up for my rights. She left immediately afterward, tears brimming. The cruelty of Arthur's campaign to discredit her felt like a second betrayal, compounding the heartbreak she'd already endured from his affair. Yet amidst the chaos, a breakthrough arrived. Laura Singletary had been quietly digging into Arthur's corporate records. Late one evening, she called Veronica, voice trembling with excitement. "I've found something big," she whispered. "Arthur's name is tied to shell companies that own multi-million-dollar condos in Dubai, plus a luxury yacht in Monaco, assets he never declared." Veronica's heart pounded. If this was true, it could strengthen her case immeasurably. The existence of hidden foreign properties would prove Arthur's efforts to conceal wealth. Laura promised to pass the information to Lisa Bloom so they could present it at the next hearing. That night, Veronica scarcely slept. Though the revelations were disturbing, they also gave her a spark of hope. Every new piece of evidence chipped away at Arthur's untouchable facade. Perhaps she wasn't fighting an impossible battle after all. Maybe, just maybe, truth would prevail. At the subsequent hearing, Lisa Bloom filed additional motions to freeze all international assets tied to Arthur Caldwell. Predictably, Arthur's team fought back, denying any wrongdoing. Bradley Fisher produced alleged independent audits, claiming no hidden holdings existed. But Lisa seized on Laura's evidence bank statements, property registrations, and even pictures of Arthur cruising on the very yacht he claimed he didn't own. The judge, now wary of Arthur's denials, allowed more time for forensic accountants to comb through the labyrinth of financial documents. He extended the asset freeze, broadening its scope to include any property or account where Arthur Caldwell was a beneficiary. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge spoke those words. Arthur looked like he'd swallowed glass. Outside, Veronica exhaled a shaky sigh of relief. With each legal victory, she felt the grip of Arthur's power loosening, though she knew the fight was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Veronica wrestled with her emotions. The love she once felt for Arthur lingered like a phantom ache. She couldn't deny that they'd shared good times charity galas, where she felt proud of his generosity, heartfelt moments spent planning a future together, evenings gazing at the lake from their bedroom window. But that Arthur seemed like a distant memory now. The man threatening her in court, undermining her reputation, and brazenly lying about hidden assets was a stranger. She tried to remember when she'd first noticed cracks in their relationship. Maybe it was when he started taking more business trips without explanation, or when he began making grand promises but never followed through. Despite the pain, Veronica steeled herself. This was the path she'd chosen, and she would see it through. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for her dignity, her self-respect. One afternoon, as Veronica reviewed documents in Lisa's office, a knock at the door startled them both. A young paralegal walked in, looking visibly shaken. "Mr. Caldwell's attorneys just served a subpoena for your personal diaries and journals," she said, handing over a stack of papers. Veronica felt her cheeks burn. She had never kept a detailed diary, but the attempt to pry into her private thoughts was alarming. Lisa read through the subpoena, her expression turning grim. "They're trying to build a narrative that you're emotionally unstable and vindictive," she explained. "We'll file a motion to quash this, but it's a reminder of how far Arthur is willing to go." A wave of indignation washed over Veronica. It wasn't enough for Arthur to cheat and lie. He wanted to scour her most personal moments, all for the sake of destroying her credibility in court. That evening, Veronica retreated to her apartment, bolting the door against the world. She sank onto the couch, hugging a throw pillow, feeling utterly drained. A year ago, her life was filled with optimism plans for children, philanthropic projects, even the possibility of expanding their charitable foundation. Now she was mired in depositions, asset traces, and vicious public speculation. She closed her eyes, recalling the last words her mother spoke before she left Havenwood Hold. Onto your truth, Veronica. People can spin lies all they want, but if you don't bend, they can't break you. She repeated those words like a mantra. Finally, summoning her courage, Veronica opened her laptop and typed out a statement of her own. She decided to speak directly to the press, carefully, and with Lisa's oversight. She would reveal the facts as she knew them. No embellishments, just the stark truth of Arthur Caldwell's betrayal. The next morning, Veronica's statement was published in several reputable outlets, including the Chicago Tribune. She wrote plainly about discovering Arthur's affair, about the suspicious financial behavior, and about her desire for a fair divorce settlement. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't mention the intimidation tactics or the threatening letter. Instead, she let the evidence of hidden assets speak for itself. Almost immediately, social media lit up. To Veronica's relief, a growing number of voices expressed sympathy and support, condemning Arthur's actions. Over time, the narrative shifted slightly. People began to see beyond the tabloid's sensational headlines and question the philanthropic image Arthur had so carefully cultivated. Arthur's PR machine fired back, releasing a glossy interview in which he insisted he was the victim of a vindictive spouse. But for the first time, people seemed less inclined to believe him. As the divorce case neared its most critical stage, Veronica's nights were haunted by nightmares, Arthur towering over her gavel in hand, banishing her to a life of isolation and poverty. She'd wake in a cold sweat, gasping for air, only to find herself alone in her tiny apartment. Yet each day she donned her armor of resolve and faced new legal challenges. She sat through excruciating depositions, endured the scorn of Arthur's attorneys, and battled the relentless swirl of public gossip. Each time, Arthur tried to twist facts or smear her character. Lisa produced evidence that steadily eroded his defenses. Slowly, methodically, the puzzle pieces were coming together. The yacht in Monaco, the condos in Dubai, the secret Swiss account. Veronica could almost see the day she'd stand victorious in court, the day she'd reclaim her life and her pride. Then came an unexpected twist. A woman named Juliana Martinez reached out to Lisa's office claiming to be Arthur's former personal assistant. Nervous and hesitant, she confessed she had direct knowledge of Arthur's illicit dealings. Juliana said she could provide concrete proof emails, bank transfers, phone call recordings. But she was scared. Arthur had once threatened to ruin her career if she ever turned on him. Veronica and Lisa arranged a discreet meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Juliana arrived looking over her shoulder as if she expected Arthur to materialize at any moment. She produced a folder stuffed with documents. "He made me sign NDAs," Juliana whispered. "But I can't keep quiet anymore. Not after what he did to you." Flipping through the folder, Veronica's eyes widened at the incriminating details transfers from Arthur's main company to offshore accounts. This could be the smoking gun they needed. The next day, Lisa Bloom filed new motions with this fresh evidence. Arthur's attorney, Bradley Fisher, tried to dismiss Juliana's testimony as the ramblings of a disgruntled ex-employee. However, the authenticity of the documents was quickly verified by forensic experts. Suddenly, Arthur found himself cornered. As tensions mounted, rumors circulated that Arthur was considering an out-of-court settlement. He feared a lengthy trial would expose more of his secrets, tarnishing his carefully maintained image beyond repair. Yet Veronica couldn't shake the feeling that he was stalling, waiting for an opportunity to strike back or shift funds one last time. Lisa cautioned Veronica to stay alert. If Arthur decided to settle, it might come with conditions like strict confidentiality clauses. But Veronica was beyond caring about hush money. She wanted accountability. She was determined to stand her ground, no matter how fiercely Arthur fought to maintain control. The court date for the next major hearing arrived under the weight of an overcast sky. Veronica dressed in a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly. As she entered the courthouse, she spotted a throng of reporters again. But she also saw familiar faces, friends like Deborah Knight and Laura Singletree, there to offer moral support. Even her mother was in the crowd, holding Veronica's hand briefly before she stepped into the hearing room. Arthur was already inside, pacing near the defense table. His skin looked pale, and his eyes brimmed with a jittery anger. When proceedings began, Lisa systematically presented the newly obtained documents from Juliana Martinez. The judge examined them, asked questions, listened to both sides. By midday, it was clear the court had seen enough to suspect significant financial impropriety. Arthur's team requested a recess to consult privately. The tension in the room was palpable. During the recess, Arthur surprised everyone by approaching Veronica in the hallway. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "We don't need to fight like this," he said, voice low. "We can work out an arrangement." For a fleeting moment, Veronica glimpsed the Arthur she once knew, the caring philanthropist, the man who'd first swept her off her feet. But she also remembered his betrayal, the lies, the smear campaign, the hidden assets. She met his gaze. "We could have Arthur," she replied, "but you made it impossible." He swallowed hard and reached into his pocket, pulling out a handwritten note. "My settlement offer," he said, thrusting it at her. Veronica took it, scanning the figures. It was a substantial sum, enough to ensure she'd live comfortably for the rest of her life. But it came with a catch, a strict non-disclosure agreement about his affairs. Veronica's heart pounded as she read the terms. She could end this war now. No more court battles. No more invasive questions. No more paparazzi. But she'd have to bury the truth, pretend the affair, and the underhanded asset hiding never happened. She'd be free financially, but gagged morally. When she looked up, Arthur's expression was calm, almost smug. He assumed she would jump at the chance to walk away from the drama. She shook her head slowly, handing back the note. "I can't," she said. "I won't be silenced." Anger flared in his eyes. He snatched the paper and stormed off. Veronica watched him go, shaky but resolute. Perhaps turning down that money was foolish, but she realized something vital. She needed justice, not just a payout. She walked back into the courtroom, prepared for whatever was next. The hearing resumed, and the judge pressed both sides for clarity. Lisa Bloom reiterated the evidence, the affair, the financial duplicity, the intimidation attempts. Bradley Fisher tried to undermine Juliana Martinez's credibility, but each time Lisa countered with another piece of corroborating evidence. Eventually the judge announced his ruling on the temporary measures. The asset freeze would continue and expand to include any account or property discovered during the ongoing investigation. Moreover, the judge suggested that if further wrongdoing was uncovered, Arthur Caldwell could face criminal charges for fraud or perjury. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Arthur sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Veronica's pulse throbbed in her ears. She knew this was a monumental victory, yet it felt surreal. She'd gone from a naive event organizer to a woman standing on the verge of defeating one of the city's most influential figures. Outside, the press ambushed them again. Arthur rushed past, ignoring the barrage of questions. Veronica stood with Lisa Bloom at her side, delivering a concise statement. "I'm grateful the court has taken steps to protect my rights. The truth is what matters most here." She retreated to a nearby cafe, adrenaline still surging. Laura and Deborah joined her, exchanging hugs and tearful smiles. "You did it," Deborah said softly. "You really stood up to him." But Veronica couldn't bring herself to fully celebrate. The final trial was still ahead, and she knew Arthur wouldn't back down easily. There were still details to unearth, more secrets that could emerge. And beyond the legal struggle, she also had to heal personally from the betrayal, from the public scrutiny, from the collapse of the life she once believed was perfect. For now, though, she savored a small taste of triumph. Over the next few weeks, forensic accountants kept uncovering evidence of Arthur's deceptive practices. Each new revelation painted a damning portrait of a man willing to manipulate his philanthropy business ventures and personal relationships to maintain a veneer of respectability. Meanwhile, Arthur's legal team scrambled to discredit sources. They claimed that Juliana Martinez had been bribed, that Deborah Knight bore a personal grudge, that Veronica had orchestrated a grand scheme to frame Arthur. Yet none of these accusations held up under scrutiny. It was a media circus. Talk shows debated the scandal, with some hosts defending Arthur's philanthropic track record, while others condemned his apparent hypocrisy. Late-night comedians even made jokes about hidden yachts and questionable Swiss accounts. Veronica watched it all with a sense of detachment. Her pain was real, but it had become fodder for national entertainment, and she couldn't entirely escape that reality. Amid the legal wrangling, Veronica's personal life stood in shambles. She'd lost friends who sided with Arthur out of fear or loyalty. She avoided major social events, uncertain whether she'd face hostility or pity. The only bright spots were the unwavering support of her mother, Laura Deborah, and a handful of true friends who believed in her. During this time, she rekindled old passions, writing poetry, practicing yoga, volunteering at a local shelter. These small acts gave her a sense of purpose beyond the courtroom drama. She began to realize that she wasn't just fighting against Arthur. She was fighting to rediscover herself, her identity, after years of molding her life around his pursuits. One late evening, she penned a poem about resilience, tears slipping down her cheeks. Maybe she thought this heartbreak would be the crucible that forged a stronger version of herself. As the final trial date approached, Arthur made one last desperate move. His lawyers filed a motion to remove the presiding judge, alleging bias. They produced quotes from prior hearings, claiming the judge had shown a consistent prejudice against Arthur's wealth. The stunt caused a brief delay, but ultimately failed. The appellate court found no grounds for recusal. Yet the maneuver signaled just how far Arthur was willing to go. It fueled Veronica's anxiety, knowing he still had cards to play. She braced herself for the possibility that new damaging information about her might surface, though she couldn't imagine what else Arthur could concoct. And then, in a twist that surprised everyone, the identity of the mystery woman finally surfaced. A tabloid obtained photos of her with Arthur on a private jet. She was identified as Simone Duval, a high-powered consultant known for her ruthless business tactics. The saga deepened. Simone Duval, her name alone carried an aura of intrigue. Rumors about her influence on Arthur's finances spread like wildfire. Some said she was his silent partner, advising him on secret offshore investments. Others claimed she was the mastermind behind his entire operation. Veronica felt a strange mixture of relief and fury. At least now the woman had a name and face, dispelling the painful mystery. But the fact that Simone might have orchestrated Arthur's deceit made her betrayal even more palpable. Word reached Veronica that Simone was preparing to testify on Arthur's behalf, presumably to challenge the narrative around his finances. Lisa, however, wasn't fazed. "If they want to put her on the stand, that could backfire," she remarked. "We have more than enough evidence to contradict anything she says." Still, the thought of facing Simone in court filled Veronica with dread. She braced for yet another confrontation. The morning of the trial's opening arguments arrived in a blur of tension. Veronica had hardly slept the night before. She dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal grey suit and a simple pendant necklace her mother had given her years ago. It felt like armor, an emblem of her roots and the resilience she'd inherited. When she walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Journalists packed the gallery laptops open and cameras at the ready. Arthur sat at the defense table, stoic Simone Duval by his side, whispering to Bradley Fisher. She wore a power suit in deep burgundy, exuding confidence. Lisa Bloom began her opening statement with measured precision, outlining Arthur's pattern of financial deception, the evidence from Juliana Martinez, and the suspicious timeline of overseas transfers. She ended with a quiet but firm assertion. "This case is about truth and ensuring that my client, Mrs. Caldwell, receives justice." Bradley Fisher responded by painting Arthur as a generous philanthropist, misunderstood and maligned by a vengeful spouse. He lambasted Veronica's aggressive tactics and accused her of orchestrating a smear campaign. Simone Duval nodded in agreement, occasionally whispering suggestions to the defense team. Witness testimonies followed. Deborah Knight took the stand describing the suspicious activity she'd witnessed. Juliana Martinez testified next, her voice trembling, but her story consistent and damning. She detailed how Simone Duval guided Arthur in transferring funds to obscure accounts. She even provided dates and account numbers. The defense tried to poke holes, questioning Juliana's credibility and highlighting her departure from Arthur's employment on strained terms. Yet each jab felt insufficient against the weight of the physical documents she provided. The tension was palpable as the gallery hung on every word, searching for cracks in the narratives. Then it was Simone Duval's turn to take the stand. The courtroom stilled as she stood up, every eye fixed on her striking figure. She wore a sleek burgundy pantsuit and a calm, collected expression, as though the entire proceeding was just another boardroom pitch. With practiced poise, she walked to the witness box and sat folding her hands in her lap. Her voice, when she began, was crisp, authoritative, and free of any trace of guilt. "I am a business consultant," Simone stated. "I was hired by Mr. Caldwell to advise on international expansion strategies. At no point did I assist him in hiding assets or in misleading anyone, including his wife." Lisa Bloom, seated beside Veronica, leaned forward slightly, noting Simone's deliberate choice of words. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't just testimony. It was a performance. Simone continued denying all allegations. She dismissed the email referencing avoiding scrutiny as a misunderstood industry phrase. It referred to competitive market analysis, she claimed. Nothing to do with the divorce. Veronica sat motionless, eyes locked on Simone. Every denial felt like a slap. This was the woman who'd stood in their home, whispered in Arthur's ear, guided him through the maze of deceit. The audacity of her confident denials made Veronica's stomach churn. Lisa approached the podium for cross-examination. "Ms. Duval, Let's go over the timeline, she began. Tone calm, but sharp. You were in frequent communication with Mr. Caldwell in the weeks leading up to his wife's discovery of hidden assets. Correct. Yes, Simone said. We were working on a new investment vehicle in the Middle East. Lisa clicked her remote, and the courtroom screen flickered to life, displaying a series of emails, many of them between Simone and Arthur. The subject lines were technical, but one stood out: urgent trust structuring to shield holdings. Care to explain this one? Lisa asked. Simone shifted. It was a legal conversation around forming a trust to protect business interests. Standard. Lisa's voice sharpened. Standard? Then why does this email, dated 1 week after Mrs. Caldwell confronted her husband, mention the need to reroute investments before the asset freeze request goes through? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Simone blinked rapidly, her composure visibly cracking for the first time. I can't speak to Arthur's intentions, she said. I just followed instructions. I wasn't aware of any legal filings. Lisa pressed further, presenting internal memos that included Simone's annotations, some even in her handwriting. One clearly read, "Move fast, no paper trail." Simone stammered. These could have been misinterpreted, Lisa interrupted. You're under oath, Ms. Duval. Silence hung heavy in the air. Simone's fingers tapped nervously on the wooden edge of the stand. Her earlier confidence dissolved into a growing unease. From her seat, Veronica saw the shift in the jury's expressions. Doubt had crept in. They were no longer seeing a sophisticated consultant. They were seeing someone implicated, someone with too much access, too much knowledge, and too many reasons to lie. Lisa concluded her cross with a piercing statement. Ms. Duval, you didn't just consult, you conspired, and the evidence shows it. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing the courtroom to breathe. Simone stepped down, face pale, lips tightly pressed. Arthur avoided her gaze. Back at their table, Lisa turned to Veronica. She's rattled, and that helps us. A lot. Veronica exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. For weeks, she had feared Simone's testimony would destroy her case. But now the cracks in Simone's mask were visible to everyone. The woman who had once operated from the shadows now found herself under the harshest light, and she was beginning to crumble. As the courtroom doors closed behind Simone, Veronica felt a subtle shift in momentum. The tide was turning. Truth, after months of suffocation, was finally clawing its way to the surface. The trial pressed on like a war of attrition. Every day in court felt like a battlefield. And on the final day of witness testimony, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken anticipation. Arthur Caldwell was called to the stand. He adjusted his tie with a measured calm, walking slowly to the witness box as cameras outside continued flashing through the courthouse windows. Dressed in a tailored grey suit, he wore the same carefully constructed expression of dignity he had worn at every gala and photo op for years. As he took the oath, his gaze drifted briefly toward Veronica. She didn't flinch. She'd spent months preparing for this moment. Arthur's attorney, Bradley Fisher, began the direct examination. His tone was sympathetic, almost theatrical. Mr. Caldwell, he asked, can you explain your business dealings that have been so harshly scrutinized in recent weeks? Arthur spoke with the calculated grace of a politician. I run a multifaceted business empire. It involves us in multiple countries, countless accounts, and teams of advisors. I never intended to hide anything from anyone, least of all my wife. He sighed dramatically. If there were errors, they were administrative, not malicious. I trusted consultants like Simone Duval to handle financial logistics. I regret not monitoring everything more closely. To the untrained ear, he sounded credible, even remorseful, but Veronica saw the familiar flicker in his eyes, manipulation wrapped in polished charm. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Lisa Bloom stood, her legal pad in hand, and walked toward the witness box. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, "do you deny threatening Juliana Martinez with professional retaliation if she exposed your financial arrangements?" Arthur stiffened. "Absolutely. I never threatened anyone." Lisa nodded, flipping through documents. "So this voicemail." She clicked a button on her laptop. "Isn't your voice." The courtroom filled with Arthur's unmistakable tone, harsh and low. "You don't want to make enemies out of people who pay your salary. Think about your future." Gasps broke out. Arthur's face turned a shade paler. "That was taken out of context," he stammered. Lisa didn't blink. "Was this also taken out of context?" She held up a printout of an email chain between Arthur and Simone, discussing offshore accounts. One line from Arthur read, "Move the money before she gets the courts involved." Arthur hesitated again. "I was referring to a business restructuring, not hiding funds from my wife." Lisa tilted her head. "And the timing one day, after Mrs. Caldwell confronted you about your affair. That's coincidence." The pressure mounted with every question. Arthur began to unravel, not dramatically, but in subtle, telling ways. He blinked more often. His answers came slower. He glanced toward Simone for reassurance, but she kept her eyes locked on the table. Lisa's final question silenced the room. "Mr. Caldwell, you've portrayed yourself as a victim of media attacks of betrayal by employees, even of your wife. But isn't the truth far simpler? You cheated. You lied. You hid millions. And now you're trying to rewrite the narrative because you got caught." Arthur's mouth opened, then closed. The room waited, but no defense came, not even from Bradley Fisher, who quietly shuffled his notes. As Lisa returned to her seat, she whispered to Veronica, "We just tipped the scale." Closing arguments followed swiftly. Lisa spoke with quiet confidence, weaving a clear and damning story from the months of evidence and testimony. "This is not about bitterness," she said. "It's about betrayal, about truth, about accountability." Bradley tried one last time to recast Arthur as a flawed but generous man. He invoked Arthur's charity work, his reputation, and even his emotional turmoil. But the energy in the room had shifted. Outside, reporters lined the courthouse steps. Arthur exited first, walking briskly past flashing cameras, face tight. Simone trailed behind him, stone-faced and silent. Veronica emerged moments later, flanked by Lisa and Laura. She didn't speak to reporters that day. She didn't have to, because by now, the world had started to see through Arthur Caldwell, and it was Veronica's truth they believed. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as everyone waited for the judge to return with his written decision. The tension in the air felt as thick as fog. Veronica sat in the front row, flanked by Lisa Bloom and Laura Singletary. Her hands were cold, despite the warmth of the courtroom clenched tightly in her lap. Across the room, Arthur sat rigid, jaw-clenched, Simone Duval by his side. Their polished exterior remained intact, but Veronica could see the stiffness in Arthur's movements, the subtle tells of a man expecting defeat. Rain trickled down the tall courtroom windows as the judge finally entered. The room fell into silence, broken only by the shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read from a printed sheet. After reviewing the substantial volume of evidence, including financial documents, email communications, testimony from key witnesses and cross-examinations presented by both parties, this court finds that Mr. Arthur Caldwell willfully concealed marital assets in an effort to deprive Mrs. Veronica Caldwell of her lawful share in divorce proceedings. A quiet gasp escaped from somewhere in the gallery. Veronica inhaled sharply, eyes locked on the judge as he continued. Furthermore, the court acknowledges a pattern of coercion, intimidation, and manipulation directed at Mrs. Caldwell and at third-party witnesses. These actions are incompatible with the obligations of good faith expected in legal proceedings. The judge paused, glanced over his reading glasses at Arthur, then continued. Accordingly, the court grants Mrs. Caldwell a divorce under terms favorable to her. She shall be awarded a comprehensive settlement that includes ownership of the couple's Chicago estate, a significant share of Mr. Caldwell's disclosed and undisclosed assets, as verified by forensic investigation, and continued protection under the asset freeze until all hidden accounts are accounted for. Arthur's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a bitter line. Simone looked stunned, her face pale. The judge wasn't done. In addition, he said firmly, "This court is forwarding evidence of potential financial fraud and perjury to the state attorney's office for further investigation." That final sentence landed like a bomb. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Arthur's posture collapsed ever so slightly, the image of power slipping away in real time. Veronica sat frozen, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, justice, vindication, and a strange, sudden weightlessness. After everything, the betrayal, the threats, the humiliations, she had won. Lisa leaned toward her and whispered, "We did it. And he's not just exposed, he's vulnerable." The judge concluded the hearing with a nod and a stern reminder for both parties to comply with post-trial reporting. Then he stood and left robe flowing behind him. As the room stirred to life, Arthur rose, muttering something to his attorney. He refused to look at Veronica. Simone followed him out like a shadow, no longer whispering instructions, no longer in control. Veronica remained seated a moment longer, soaking it all in. The cameras were already swarming outside, and she knew the questions would come. But this moment, this one right here, was hers. When she finally stood, Lisa and Laura embraced her tightly. "I feel like I can breathe again," Veronica whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Outside, the sky was still grey, but to her it looked brighter than it had in months. Reporters surged toward her, mics outstretched, but this time Veronica faced them without fear. She spoke clearly, calmly. "I'm grateful the court recognized the truth. This was never about vengeance, it was about justice, about refusing to be silenced." She didn't need to say more. Her poise, her strength, and the verdict said it all. That night, Veronica returned to her apartment, set down her keys, and looked out over the city lights. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. Not because she'd defeated Arthur, but because she'd reclaimed herself, her name, her story, her future. And this time, it belonged to her alone. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. She felt tears welling as relief, vindication, and overwhelming emotion washed over her. She turned to Lisa and Laura, embracing them, scarcely believing it was over. Arthur's face was a dark mask of fury. Simone stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Outside, reporters bombarded Veronica with questions, but for the first time she felt at peace facing their cameras. She spoke clearly. "I'm grateful to the court for recognizing the truth. This wasn't about revenge, it was about fairness and dignity. That evening in the quiet of her apartment, Veronica allowed herself a moment to weep for the marriage she had lost, for the illusions that had shattered. Yet she also felt a new sense of freedom blossoming within her. A chapter of her life had closed, and though scarred, she emerged standing tall. In the end, Veronica Caldwell found more than just a legal victory. She reclaimed her voice, her identity, and her future. The court's ruling froze Arthur's elaborate web of secret holdings, forcing him to face the consequences of his betrayal. Though she lost friends and endured public scrutiny, Veronica discovered a newfound strength within herself. No longer defined by her husband's wealth or reputation, she stepped forward into a life shaped by her own choices. If this story captivated you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you won't miss more true-to-life drama and inspiring tales of resilience. Every click you make helps us continue bringing you stories of triumph, heartbreak, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. Join our community, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned. More riveting narratives are just around the corner.